I would like to welcome Mr. Giles Duley, founder and CEO of the Legacy of War Foundation, UN Global Advocate for persons with disabilities in conflict and peace-building situations. The stage is yours.
I arrived at this conference yesterday with a presentation, ready to sit on stage, and then I rethought, why am I here? There are so many experts in this room, politicians, donors, representatives of countries. And I thought, what is my purpose here? And yesterday I was speaking to a friend on the phone, and we were talking about their work, and they said, thank you for reminding me of my purpose. That's why I love you as a friend. And I thought, that's why I am here, as a friend, to remind us all of our purpose in being here. I also wanted to make a statement about my shorts. I never wear shorts. I don't like the attention I get around my prosthetic legs. But I had 2 messages come to me this week from people who've been injured in conflict. The countries don't matter because I know this happens globally and has happened to me. One of them was telling me that him and his friends were asked to leave a swimming pool because people were upset at seeing their amputations. Another person told me they'd been asked to leave a cafe because seeing their prosthetics had upset some mothers in that room. So, again, as always, I'm changing things. So Tash from my team last night was cutting my trousers, turning them into shorts, because I wanted to sit here in solidarity with everybody who walks with an injury, who has visible scars, who has prosthetics. Because we should be proud of the people. We should support them. There should never be anybody that feels uncomfortable who is asked to leave a public space because of the injuries they carry. So that is why I'm wearing my shorts today. And why am I here generally? As was mentioned, about 20 years ago, I left my life as a rock and roll photographer, which was a lot of fun, I have to say, to start documenting the impact of war. I have one gift, and that's as a storyteller, as a photographer. And I wanted to use that to try and create change. I always said I was not a photojournalist. I was an angry man with a camera. And actually, the first project I did was in Angola with the Mines Advisory Group, looking at the legacy of landmines there. And I had never really come across this issue. And seeing these villages and children that have been maimed and killed because of these legacy weapons really affected me. And I knew that landmines, UXO, was going to be the main focus of my work. That's why I set up my foundation, Legacy of War Foundation, because it is so important that we realize that these weapons continue to kill long after peace treaties are signed. It was while doing this work in 2011 that I had what I say was a really bad day at the office in Afghanistan. I lost both my legs, my arm. I spent 1 year in hospital. But I was lucky enough to be able to return to work and continue what I do. 3 years after that injury, in 2015, 1 year after the war in Ukraine began, I went there to start documenting the impact of war. Again, most specifically, the issue of landmines. And I have continued to do that work. In fact, I just traveled 36 hours from the front lines near Kharkiv, where I was quite literally in the trenches. I still have the mud on my feet. And I can tell you, when you're near the front lines, the situation for UXO in landmines is greater than any of us can truly imagine. After 20 years of documenting conflict, I have never seen anything on that scale. It is truly overwhelming. And I have been overwhelmed by doing this work. 2 years ago, I was working near Bakhmut, some of the worst fighting in Ukraine. I have ambulances on the front line through my organization. We'd seen a lot of civilian casualties. And I needed a break. And I drove, and I didn't really know where I was going. And I ended up in France, in Verdun, the scene of some of the worst fighting in World War I. For some reason, I needed to visit those old battlefields, to walk along those old trench lines, to be reminded of the history. There is an area there known as the Zone Rouge, an area still so contaminated from UXO, from World War I, that nobody can enter. And while I was there, a farmer on his tractor was killed by one of these legacy bombs. It brought something home to me. It made me realize that if we do not clear the ordnance in Ukraine, there is a child not yet born that will die from this war. That is the legacy. That is the choice we have to make. I returned from that trip more invigorated to do my work in Ukraine. I was visiting a lot of injured servicemen and civilians, many of them amputees, many of them in their darkest moments. And I would sit with them and I would say, I know what it is like to be in that moment, in that darkest moment where you see no future. But I said, look at me. I am an example of you can be a survivor. You can live a full life. My body was broken by war and hatred, but it was rebuilt by love. And there is no greater love than in Ukraine for those who have been injured in this terrible war. Now I continue to do my work, and it's not easy. I'm in pain most days. Physically, it can be very challenging for me. But I have a purpose. When I was injured, I spent 1 year in hospital. The first 46 days of that, when I was in intensive care, I could only communicate by blinking. I was then told I would never walk, never live independently, never have a life. My experience, like many landmine survivors, having to rebuild a new life. I remember 3 months after my injuries, I was well enough to be transferred to a wheelchair for the first time and have a shower. I saw myself in a mirror, and I was repulsed and disgusted. Scars across my body, the missing limbs. When they put me back in my bed, I cried myself to sleep. And I remember thinking, I wished I'd just passed away in Afghanistan because I was not brave enough to deal with this new reality. And I know this is the reality for so many survivors, not recognizing themselves, not wanting to live this new life. But I woke up the next morning. I'm notoriously stubborn. And the next morning I woke up, and there was a mantra in my mind, something that I have repeated to myself every day since, and something I want to share with everybody in this room. I woke up the next day, and I said to myself, from this moment on, I will never think about what I can't do. But I will focus on what I can and what I can control, and I will be the very best at that. When we look at issues such as landmines, UXO, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the situation. It's a global crisis. It's a global situation, not just Ukraine. We can't stop the wars. Maybe we can't stop the use of landmines and UXO. But what we can do is focus every day on clearance, on making sure economies thrive, to making sure there are less people injured, to make sure those who are injured are supported to have lives like I had. 18 months after my injury, I returned to Afghanistan to continue my work. I remember a lot of people said to me, you have nothing to prove. Why are you doing this? And I told them the story of a young boy called Atola. Atola was 12 years old. He was walking to school in Afghanistan just a few miles from where I got injured. It was literally, I think, 2 months after I got injured. And on his way to school that day, he stepped on a landmine. He lost an arm and a leg. I met him in the ICRC limb fitting center in Kabul, and I will never forget his face. People ask me, do you get emotional when you do your work? And I say, no, in many ways, like a surgeon, I just focus. But on this particular day, in fact, the first photograph I'd taken after my injury, as I looked through my viewfinder, my eyes were streaming. I was watching Atola walking up and down between the two supporting bars with his small plastic leg and plastic arm. It was like he didn't even see me. He walked backwards and forwards. And when people ask me, why do you continue to go back? I say because of Atola. Because if my work means one child does not have to go through what I go through every day, the physical pain, the emotional pain, then I have done my job. And I sit here today as a friend to remind you all that is what our purpose is. I have shared these stories. I have shared my story. I will leave here believing that I've done that purpose, that because of the work that you do, one less child will have to go through what I go through, will not have to suffer that. But it is up to you, because in this room, there is the power, there is the belief, and there are the people that can make sure there is not a child not yet born who will suffer in Ukraine and in other countries in the world. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.